Hey there guys, welcome back to my movie review series. So, I recently reviewed the movie Olympus Has Fallen. As I told you guys in that review, I recently purchased the trilogy of the Has Fallen series, whatever you call it, the series of action movies starring Gerard Butler, and I told you guys I was going to be reviewing them all. So, yeah, this was my first time watching this one, London Has Fallen. This is the sequel to Olympus Has Fallen. If you guys haven't checked out that review yet, I'll leave a link in the description section to my movie review series, and you can check out my review for Olympus Has Fallen. And this is the sequel, which came out 3 years later. This one came out in 2016, and it was once again starring Gerard Butler and Aaron Eckhart, and of course Morgan Freeman, who has kind of a bit part in the movie. He isn't really on screen much, but he's kind of there in the background. But the difference this time is, rather than taking place in the US, this one is actually set in London, which I found quite interesting, because the first movie was just a huge, like, over the top, like, crazy action movie, which was sort of an assault on the White House. Basically, Korean terrorists attempt to take over the White House in an attempt to set off like a nuclear war in America. Detonating all the warheads. They assassinate the Korean president and attempt to take Aaron Eckhart, who plays the U.S. president, hostage and whatnot, and Gerard Butler has to save him. And it was kind of a die-hard situation, with Gerard Butler sort of taking the role of John McClane, and taking out these terrorists from the inside and whatnot. And there was a lot of stuff going on outside, and it was just a really fun, over-the-top, like, brutal R-rated action movie. And it's kind of weird, like, how do you really do a sequel to that? When you see a movie that's that over the top and that large scale, with such a high budget and high production values and such a satisfying ending, it's really hard to top that. And with this movie taking place in London, it's very different to the first movie. It's not quite as large scale. A lot of this movie is basically Gerard Butler and Aaron Eckhart traveling through the streets of London, trying to avoid terrorists who are basically like disguised as police officers, and there's just terrorists all over the place. Like, they don't know who they can trust. There's double agents. There's people within their own agency and whatnot, people within the British intelligence agency who are out to get them. And it's basically a revenge plot. Now, the main villain of this movie, and this is one thing that kind of caught my eye about this movie, I didn't know he was in it. The main villain of this movie is actually the main villain of the movie Undisputed 4, which is one of my favourite movies of all time. And that was quite cool. And interestingly enough, this movie came out the same year as Undisputed 4, so that guy had a pretty good year with movies. And yeah, he is kind of there in the background. He's like an international arms dealer who arms terrorists and arms private contractors and whatnot. And he basically sets this plan in motion in order to sort of take revenge on the US president and the world leaders for what happened to his family and whatnot. And basically, a family member of his was killed in a drone strike. And of course, drone strikes always have repercussions. They always have collateral damage and whatnot. So that it's gonna provoke a response from somebody. So he basically takes up the role of trying to avenge these people. And yeah, it's a very simple plot. It's a pretty generic plot. Okay, terrorist wants revenge. Basically takes it out on all the world leaders. The reason why it takes place in London is because the Prime Minister of the UK dies at the beginning of the movie, and he's summoned to basically a state funeral, and all the world leaders are there. And while this happens, there's just a massive terrorist attack. Like I said, terrorists all over the place, disguised as regular police officers and security guards and whatnot. And it's just, shit hits the fan and it goes crazy. And once again, Gerard Butler has to protect the president, has to fight a bunch of bad guys. And I like this movie. I didn't think it was that bad. I know that it definitely wasn't as good as the first movie. And I really, to be honest, didn't really think that the first movie, after seeing it, didn't think it really needed a sequel. But with this movie being what it was, it wasn't a bad action movie. It would have probably stood alone as its own idea, its own action movie. I mean, I like Gerard Butler. I like him as an actor. I think he's pretty decent in these types of roles. He knows how to do action. He does a fair bit of his own stunts. You know, the stunt work in this movie is pretty good. In fact, I would say that some of the special effects in this movie, like some of the CGI and stuff, is actually a lot more realistic than the first movie. There's more practical explosions and practical effects and stuff in this movie than there was in the first one. And some of the action sequences are actually a little bit more realistic and plausible. And I mean, the first movie had really good action and was really fun, but there was a bit of like noticeable CGI. There isn't really like any noticeable CGI in this movie, so that was what I was quite pleasantly surprised by. However, I have to say that it is a bit generic, it is a bit cliche, it is somewhat predictable. I mean, look, action movies like this follow a pretty clear and pretty um, tried formula, and it's a formula that works. And like I said, it stands on its own. You know, this one certainly would stand alone as a standalone movie. You know, it doesn't really need to be seen as part of a series. Like, you don't need to see the first one to understand this one. Okay, I mean, Gerard Butler's a Secret Service agent who is assigned to protect the president, who's also his close friend, played by Aaron Eckhart. The acting is solid. I mean, you got, like I said, Morgan Freeman's in the movie. I mentioned this in my review for the first one, how he kind of just phones in his performance. You know, you could tell that when he's in movies nowadays, he's really just there for the paycheck. He doesn't really put much effort into his acting performances. But Gerard Butler's fantastic in the movie, as is Aaron Eckhart. And you know, I just thought that there's not really a whole lot for me to say about this movie other than that it's pretty generic and it's fun. I had fun with it. It's just, would I say it's one of the best action movies I've seen? No, obviously not. I mean, like I said, I've seen that many great action movies over the years, and that many like feel good action films, to the point where nothing really surprises me. And when you see a film like this that's just kind of generic and just basically follows the same formula that you've seen but does it in its own way, it's fun. I've got really no problem with this movie. So this is just a quick review, man. I've got no real issue with the movie. Is it a movie I'd recommend? If I was to recommend one of these movies in this trilogy, it would be the first one. I just think the first one was more of an interesting, more of an original idea. I mean, it was more visually impressive. You know, it was more large scale. It was a lot more gore and violence in the first movie, and I just think that you know, that one to me was just a bit more memorable. Like the White House getting taken over and the president being taken hostage and all that, and Gerard Butler having to save him and Gerard Butler having to fight terrorists. That was just a little bit more fun to me. You know, they had a lot more fun with the first movie. It was a very fun and much grander scale plot. Whereas this movie, again, it's not a bad movie. It's just a little bit formulaic, but it's fun. I had no problem with it. Now, I'm going to be reviewing the third movie. I have a lot to say about the third movie. I actually watched this one and the third one back to back, and I've got a lot to say about it. So that'll probably be a longer review, and that'll close out my Has Fallen review series. So stay tuned for that. That's going to be out within probably the next couple of days. We'll see if I've got time to upload it, but we'll see. So let me know what you guys think anyway. Yeah, check this movie out, man. You know, you can buy the trilogy really cheap. You know, it's a very cheap trilogy. I've seen it in the shop going at a discount price. So yeah, if you just want a fun action movie, I would totally check this one out. It's totally fine. So let me know what you guys think. Stay tuned for my Angel Has Fallen review. Thanks for watching, and God bless, and stay tuned for more reviews.